Welcome to the Talking Precision Medicine podcast, brought to you by Genialis. I'm your host, Raphael Rosengarten, CEO and co-founder of Genialis. On this podcast, we discuss the future of healthcare and health technology, and how advances in data and data science are fueling the next industrial revolution. Please subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more information on Genialis and our unique approach to AI-driven precision medicine, please visit our website at www.genialis.com. That's www.genialis.com. Now, on to the show. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Today, I'm delighted to have as a guest an old friend and old colleague, Mida Pezeshkian. Mida is the principal of a company called Stemma CG. She's going to do a better job of telling you about it than I am. So let's jump right into it. Mida, welcome to the show and tell us all about Stemma CG.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, so Sama CG is a boutique consulting firm. Sometimes I call it a strategy firm, but it kind of depends. It's a little advisory firm that I started about 3 years ago. And what we do is we help biotech companies and healthcare companies and their investors commercialize new products, launch and grow it over the course of their, company's life cycle. And then we help their investors with investment decision making, due diligence when they're closing out new investments, and then also helping them with operational efficiency. So essentially, it's a company that partners with leaders within these organizations or their investors to improve the health and the potential for the company.
Got it. And so, you've talked about the internal stakeholders and the investors. That suggests that you're mostly working with, I don't know, smaller private entities, but can you maybe give us an idea of your typical customer profile, but maybe also the range of groups you work with?
Sure, definitely. So it kind of varies, and the type of work that we do kind of depends on the age of the company as well. So for maybe a very early stage to companies that are launching their first or second product, we tend to be a lot more hands-on. So this could be putting together their entire commercialization plan and then actually helping them execute the plan. So getting super tactical of, what do you even need to do to launch this product? And then let's figure out how to get every item done, whether it's kind of coordinating that process with the internal teams or just going in as like a fractional person to help them. But for maybe an SME, larger, kind of later in their growth stage, maybe in their growth stage or scale ups, this could be a little bit more strategic. So maybe they've already commercialized a few products, but they want to think about the next chapter for growing their business. If it's new products that they want to get into, or maybe they want to pivot into a new category and a new market. And then I actually even work with enterprise pharma. So this is super big operations, but then this kind of process becomes a little bit more strategic, helping them identify new avenues where they can launch their digital programs or, different partnerships. So it really depends on the stage of the company and what they need. And I tend to think about these opportunities as a way to connect with the decision makers within the organization and then understand exactly what's holding them back and then devise essentially a plan to improve that process for them.
Would it be a fair summary then to say that this is almost like product management for hire, whereas you have other kind of advisory that's a fractional CFO, this is almost like a fractional chief product officer kind of engagement?
Definitely, definitely. And the way that it has worked in the past that's been super helpful is to go in with a problem solving mindset. So, as a product person across the different companies and market segments that I've worked, I've always gone in and asked myself, okay, what do we need to do to get this company to succeed? Now, that's a lot of different things that could happen. But a product person, in my opinion, or someone who's a, successful product person sits sort of in the middle of a lot of different groups and figures out how to work with them and how to get them to work together. So that's why I think having a problem solving approach is a good place to start because you tend to figure out, okay, what kind of outcome do we need? And then what do we need to do to get to that result? And then that goes to, product lifecycle management, hiring people, making sure that you can set up teams. It's all connected in my eyes.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people who don't come from a technology background or a background where you're actually building and selling things don't appreciate the extent to which product management is related to finance, related to business, related to, you have to speak all the languages. You have to be able to speak the languages, at least in our industry, of both the life scientists and the technologists, whichever the technology that may be. You said a couple things I'd like to unpack. So, with enterprise pharma, you mentioned digital programs and products, but in the life sciences in general, the word product historically means a drug, or maybe it's a diagnostic device. But of course, in the tools and service industry, it could also be a kit or a test or a piece of software. What are the range of products that you work on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say in the life sciences tools space, it could be reagent, hardware, software, sometimes all of them. So sometimes, with larger companies, you get to see that they really try to put together like a whole solution that spans the reagent, software, and hardware. But for some companies, actually lately, especially on the health tech side, it's been a lot of software that has some sort of an AI machine learning component, especially, at right now, that's a very hot topic. So that's definitely another area. And then with the pharma clients, well, it's definitely a drug, right? But now more and more pharma is trying to figure out supporting products and solutions that helps the patient become more successful when they're taking their drug. So that's kind of where the digital health side of things comes in, where they might be partnering or internally building digital solutions that helps their patients be more successful when they're taking the drug and staying on it for as long as it's necessary.
These could be like patient navigator apps or something like that potentially.
Definitely. Yeah. Or, sometimes even partnering with other companies that have really figured out how to have a strong patient population so that pharma can just tap into that instead of building it themselves.
And tell me about the name of your enterprise, STEM SCG. What is that? Where is that from? What does that mean?
It's kind of got a little bit of a funny story. So I consider myself a pretty STEM person. I started in the math world, and when I was in high school in Iran, where I grew up, you have to pick a major. So I was a math major, and then I started to learn a little bit about chemistry, and I was so excited and loved it enough where I went to get my undergrad degree in chemistry. And then a chance experience led me down to become a biologist. So STEM is really important. I have to say, funny enough, I tried to get into engineering a little bit and it's totally not for me. So it's the E. We should leave that out. But yeah, and then analytics. It's really something that I've picked up. So I like to think of myself as pretty creative. And when it comes to my job, I tend to become pretty creative. But when it came to naming, I thought, you know what? I'm a STEM girl, and I got into analytics. Let's just call it STEMA, and then CG for consulting. Super basic, but gets the job done.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if that was cell and gene or something.
No, but that's a good one. See, that I think as a consultant, you should always be ready to take the mold of the client that you work in. So if it's cell and gene therapy company, that's even better.
All right. So you're a STEM girl. I love that. With an early passion for math and chemistry, how do you end up in product management? What's been that journey, and how did you go from the laboratory and the classroom into something that has such a business focus?
Yeah, definitely. So, interestingly enough, from where we were just talking about earlier, with a products person being someone who needs to speak the language of, all the key stakeholders within the organization, I think the fact that I kind of came up a little bit as an interdisciplinary person. So, kind of, getting into math and chemistry and biology. And then just, through my graduate work, I was able to collaborate with the chemistry degree while I was on the biology side with the chemistry team at my campus. And we built a biosensor that detected this sort of mechanism of relapse that I was studying. So, that opportunity to talk to the chemistry team, talk to the tech transfer office, figure out kind of what I needed to do on my end, got me really interested in, okay, so now we're doing this patent, but what does that mean really? Like, what do we do with this thing? And it kind of got me in this path of trying to understand like the industry side of it. And I really appreciated that. So when I was doing my postdoc at University of Michigan, they have a fantastic group called MyLead. That's the consulting arm of University of Michigan. So I started to do a little bit of, some project work with them. I got interfaced with the Ann Arbor community of biotech companies, and it really got me motivated that I wanted to go that route. I wanted to go on the industry side. And then the first job that I had at this little small company called Swift Biosciences that actually became acquired by IDT, which is a Danaher company. It actually, that experience of seeing how things are done within the industry and then identifying things that we could do better got me to learn more about product management. So I'll be honest with you, I never even knew about product management until I got this job. I was essentially the person interfacing the sales team and the R&D team and kind of the internal operations of the company. And I started to realize there's so much feedback that we're not capturing from our customers, and so much that we could do with our R&D team being more informed about what's actually happening outside. And while I was starting to research it, I realized, oh wow, okay, so there's an actual discipline of product management that's job is to do all of these things and really manage the entire product life cycle for the company. So it was super chance, and then I got an opportunity to do that work within the organization. Learned so much. I mean, that was like legitimately, I would say, an actual education, that job, the 4 years that I was there. And it really set me down on this path of wanting to learn more about product management from best practices. Like, how do you actually do this job well? And that's kind of how it started for me.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer of learning on the job and getting your education hands-on and in the trenches. I remember when I was recruited into Genialis as the fourth co-founder, the founding CEO asked me what I wanted to do, and I didn't know anything about startups, right? I was coming right out of the lab. I just knew I wanted to do something with a business bent. And he said, "How about chief product officer?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And as soon as we hung up, I went and Googled, what is a chief product officer?
That's how it happens to most scientists who don't go into R&D, right? If you're going into sort of the commercial side of things as a super technical person, it's a lot to learn. And I think actually if that's for you, if you thrive on that type of ambiguity and learning new things, it's a super awesome thing to do for your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a naturally quantitative person also, it can help because it's a discipline that's aided by having, well, quantitative discipline by putting numbers on stuff. But um, if you're a scientist who's uncomfortable with like price tags, it can be tricky to.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I've enjoyed it, because I think that just being a curious person, I believe in lifelong learning and lifelong improvement. So that for me at that time, it was a new thing to learn because I felt like, okay, so I have a good understanding of the things from a technical perspective, but what is business? Like, what do we need to do to actually be successful in launching a product and then growing it? And that was a whole nother discipline for me to learn, which I've really enjoyed. And it's still very exciting to
Mhm.
me.
No, that's super interesting. So you had this amazing experience at Swift, and that's where we met because our companies were collaborating. After the IDT acquisition, after you left Swift, how did you encounter the growing world or the burgeoning world of digital products?
Yeah, so just a little step back to that, I actually went into the diagnostic lab space during COVID, which was such a crazy experience. I mean, a very, I would say, important experience in my entire career because it gave me an opportunity to learn how to grow and scale rapidly under fire, right? Because when I was at like a smaller kind of operation, we were building products or we're launching them, growing them, but and obviously getting, your revenue targets, that there's always a pressure there, but there's no greater amount of pressure than like making sure that patients get their results under a global pandemic, right? So learning how to do that, that was a great experience. But I was a little bit, to be honest, burned out because I became an essential worker during the pandemic. And my entire pandemic experience was being inside the lab, which was amazing in many ways, but I needed a little bit of break. So I actually ended up leaving that role to go into a very different job. it's actually a company that still is serving patients in the long-term care and skilled nursing facilities. So I went from, if you think about it, kind of the evolution is I went from a super like life sciences tool heavy company to more of applying those things in a diagnostic setting. But then after that, I went to a much more patient delivery type of role where the company was actually deploying human capital into
Kind of
these.
true healthcare.
Yeah, for healthcare. And then, but the super interesting thing is they asked me to help them build their entire suite of software products to manage all of the patient experiences, and something that I definitely hadn't done or thought about or anything like that. So it was a really amazing opportunity to build a team and build essentially the process and the product. So it was a much more hands-on, very sort of blank page, try to figure out how to do all of this stuff. And when I walked in, we were like a team of three, and then when I left, it was like over 60 people across 5 different departments. So that was like such an amazing growing journey. And to bring it back to your earlier question of how did I even get into consulting, is these different experiences gave me a really interesting window and view into how different companies solve products at different stage of their growth. And I started to see a lot of patterns where when you make decisions, what are the components of making a solid decision inside of a company? What do you need to know and do in order to say, I want to launch this product or I want to grow this product? Like how do you get from that idea to an actual winning market disrupted product? And I felt like, I have an opportunity to work with so many different companies to answer these kind of questions, because now I'm starting to see a pattern of how you could do this.
I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Now, in your work, looking back at your experiences, do you have kind of a playbook or a set of frameworks? So if you come on site with a new client, it seems like it almost doesn't matter what the product is. Do you have a way of hitting the ground running?
Yeah, because I think it's really a formula, and the formula with any formula, there's always exceptions. Then you should be very open minded. So I don't believe there's this like cookie cutter. Oh, here's a spreadsheet. This is how you're going to be successful. It's actually really doing. The framework is to go in and to audit and identify what's going on in that company, right? So like a phase of learning. And then the next step on that is like understanding, okay, so now we want to do this, whatever the this is. And then you need to figure out how to set up a plan forward that's granular enough, that it's detailed enough, but it's actually something that can be done, right? There's a planning phase that you need to fully understand the different components of what you're trying to do. So being a very kind of like open-minded person, but being also a detail-oriented person that can really sit down and figure out what are the actual components to get this job done. And then you really need to have good project management, capabilities. Like you can't get tired of the work, right? Because the devil is in the details, and doing project management or even change management requires a lot of consistency and requires being an organized person. And then after that, it's actually, making sure that you have a learning feedback loop where you understand, okay, so these are the things that we've learned from this. Here's how we can optimize the process. But I think in a lot of this whole entire framework needs to be based on a data-driven approach. So leveraging as much data, and that's actually a big cornerstone of STEM SDG, is leveraging the data that's available to us, whether if it's open source or it's alternative data sets that you have to organize yourself or buy from somewhere, and then understanding how to stitch all of this together so that every decision that you make is informed by data.
Hey gang, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Talking Precision Medicine, powered by Genialis. We'll be back in just a moment. I was thinking about what Mida said earlier, how one can't just focus on today's customers and ignore where the market is going. If you want innovations to stay relevant, if you want products to really resonate, one must keep their eyes on the future. Speaking of the future, this fall, Genialis is hitting the road for some of the biggest events in science and technology, starting with Biotech Week Boston during the week of September 15th, then the AI in Health Conference in Houston, Texas, September 22nd to 26th, where I'll be moderating a panel on AI and therapeutics. We'll also have team members at Italian Tech Week in Turin, the AACR NCI EORTC International Conference, Bio Europe, SITSI Annual Meeting, the CEO Roundtable of Oncology, and the ESMO Congress in Berlin. If you'll be at any of these events, come find us. The full list is linked in the description. Now, back to the conversation. The other piece that I'm curious about, in my recollection, a huge amount of the actual work of a product manager, or maybe I should say the currency of a product manager, is this idea of the user story, right? Like, what are the problems you're trying to solve for the end user? Not so much, what is the thing they think they want, but what is really the problem to solve? How do you go about adapting to, I'm thinking especially about your jump from the COVID lab to a healthcare system, about inserting yourself into the narrative with the users.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say there's a couple of things to consider here. I like that you said the unmet need because that to me is the most critical thing. Building products or technology for the sake of building them is never, in my opinion, and in my experience, never the best thing to do. So you always want to start from the unmet need. But also another thing that you said, which I really believe, is that you can't just go and take the recipe from the customer, right? So being overly committed to what the customer is asking for causes you to miss essentially what other features or what other segments and kind of non-customers for now you should be targeting. So I think that really analyzing this and you really should do this sometimes with observing things like for the case of like a building a healthcare product. I went and rounded with providers and I got a lot of feedback from how they do their job. So making that observation like firsthand is sometimes very important, but sometimes that's not necessary, right? Like when you're building maybe a super technical, diagnostic solution, like maybe you really need to make sure that the chemistry is solid of your technology. So it kind of depends. I think you need to be open-minded. And I know I'm using this word multiple times, but I really believe in it because I think that you have to be a good observer and open-minded to what the opportunity in front of you is and how you need to solve it.
No, that makes sense. I mean, so much of launching impactful products is changing human behavior. You have to be looking for those opportunities, the arbitrage opportunities where something's inefficient. And it's the famous apocryphal quote from, I don't know if it was Henry Ford or whomever. If you ask people what they wanted, they'd say faster horses, right? You need to be thinking, and I think Steve Jobs is often thought of as sort of like the ultimate product manager, where he was dreaming of things that no one else had the vision for, and he knew people wanted it, even though you probably couldn't have polled 20 people and gotten an answer with, "Yeah, I want a supercomputer in my pocket with a touch screen," etcetera, right? But he was able to observe the behavior and say, "What if this existed?"
For sure. And I think that, in these kind of situations, if you're very diligent in understanding the unmet need, and then because things are so complex these days in whether in healthcare or in diagnostics or anything essentially in the biotech space, you need to have a solid understanding of the entire workflow of your customer. So the unmet need is a critical place where you're going to fill that gap. However, everything needs to fit together because your customer is only using maybe your workflows or your technologies for a certain aspect of their work, but you need to make sure that you fit with everything upstream and downstream of it. So actually, that's where I think the market intelligence and leveraging data is super important, is because it's really difficult for us now, like as humans, to put all of these different dimensions of things, keep it in our head. So figuring out how to build a data pipeline that helps you fully understand kind of the different dimensions of the market as you're developing a new product is super important.
I wanna hit on some of the aspects of data and AI, but maybe before we get there, before we leave kind of the core work of STEM and your experience in product management, when you show up to a new client site, is there typically a thing or a couple things that are always missing, that seem to be missing more often than not? Like, in other words, is there a key ingredient that just isn't native to new companies in the product launch journey that you're able to bring and catalyze? Or is it really just this whole kind of end-to-end framework that you've built through experience?
No, that's a good question. I would say, a lot of times what I encounter is the founders or the teams, like when you get super busy, you kind of lose that perspective that's needed where I think like a person with a fresh set of eyes can come in and identify. So, that's I think that that's probably one of the, to the Steve Jobs reference, he always had the ability to take a step back to see what the world was looking for, right? But if you get like too wrapped up in the day to day of your organization, you can lose touch with kind of that original mission that you have. So maybe that's what I see a lot of times where like I can walk into a client office, but sometimes it's a virtual place, but when I get to know them, I realize that sometimes they've just been so busy with so many things that they kind of lost touch with the kind of ingredients within them and their teams that got them to do a lot of these things really well. So realigning that, I think sometimes is very important in reducing chaos. Like I see a lot of chaos, but that is because it's a tough world out there these days.
Oh my gosh, and nothing breeds chaos like a product launch with a deadline and like all the moving parts and the coordination.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, no, that really hits home as a technical founder who gets in the weeds on product conceptualization, product development, and product launch. This idea is saying, well, we know from, let's say, a year ago or 2 years ago when we hatched this thing, what we think it's going to be for. We think we know what the product is. We think we know what problem it solves, but we forgot to step back and keep asking people what they're going to use it for, right? We forgot to step back and see how the world actually engages with our products, and reframe it. I can appreciate how fresh eyes help that process.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, in commercialization, I think a lot of times, like, companies need to really focus on building a strong technology to be competitive. And sometimes you need to focus it to a certain customer base. But I think it's really important. And what I sometimes observe when I go in to these scenarios is that thinking about the non-customer, like not now customer, is very important also. So don't get like too caught up with just the customer base, because that's where a lot of technology companies over the years have gotten obsolete, is right, because they've catered to a certain population of customers and then they've forgotten where the market is moving. So keeping in touch with the market is moving is super important.
No, that's absolutely great advice. All right, let's shift gears. I want to go back to what you're talking about, building data pipelines and leveraging advanced analytics, the A in STEMMA. Well, talk to us about it. What are the ways that you are helping companies harness data? And I want to think about the use or the employment of AI tools in two ways. One is some companies bake those into their products. In some cases, like our company, AI is the product, right? Our products are algorithms. In other cases, we're talking about using analytics internally to be more efficient, to be more organized, to have more impact. Can you reflect on those two uses and how you put them in practice, how you see them out in the world?
Yeah, definitely. So from a product management perspective, I sometimes laugh to myself when I realize like so much of what I used to do, like the way I used to do them 10 years ago as a product manager and what is possible now. And a lot of it is because of AI, and not just Gen AI, but just, I didn't have at that time, that like 10 years ago, I didn't know about factor analysis. I didn't know about sentiment analysis. I didn't know these things, right? So I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff very manually, or not even doing them at all, or just like going through like the competitor data and try to figure out how to beat that, or how to position our product against it. But I think with advanced analytics becoming a lot more democratized, for people, because of and also just Gen AI tools. Like I use like Perplexity a lot just for my own daily like existence. It's a really good opportunity for product managers or for founders like early on to actually start to integrate a lot of these things. And of course, my firm enables a lot of that stuff. So it's very accessible to them because of the work that I do. But yeah, I think that, so if you're like a product manager, like within an organization, there's a lot of advanced analytics tools that you could get your hands on, and just even self teach to yourself in many ways, and quickly get an opportunity. So I'll give you one example. Like 10 years ago or so, when we would launch a product, we would figure out what's the cost of goods, and then we would put some margin percentage on top of it and call it pricing. But now my whole world is entirely different way that I operate, which is like thinking about like pricing curves, like the supply and demands with diminishing returns. There's a lot of ways that you could actually like introduce data, especially because there's a lot of open source data now available and companies that will sell you kind of competitor data. So it's a completely different approach now with using advanced analytics in product management. And then the other side of it is, to your point of building AI actually inside of your products, it's a great opportunity, especially for drug development and just healthcare on the administration side or even clinical decision making side, to really reimagine the way that we design products. An electronic health record system, for example, before a lot of these things were accessible, would require a lot of manual processes and then people doing manual things to be able to get to a certain outcome. Let's say billing, for example, you have to do all these audits, but now you don't have to do as much as that anymore. And I think when you're designing your company or now doing a lot of AI transformation, there's a lot of opportunities to completely reimagine the old workflows by integrating AI.
Oh, that resonates. There are even some now kind of famous in the tech CEO world memos from CEOs telling their employees that they're expected to find ways of integrating, the openly available AI and analytics into all of their workflows. And that's fine. I'm all for efficiency and working smarter, not harder. But I think in our industry, it's most interesting when we start thinking about AI within the products or as the products, because it is such a heavily regulated industry. And well, this is new. So there isn't a ton of regulatory precedent for a lot of what we're doing. How do you think about helping your clients navigate just kind of that world of unknowns, right? Like the unknowns around, well, can we do this? What is going to be the regulatory view on some of these tools that haven't been used in this context before?
Yeah. So first, I would highly recommend people to not just try to integrate like AI into things, but actually try to think from scratch, what should the workflow for an AI native company be to solve a problem. So it's one of those things that is, naturally we tend to think, oh, okay, so this is my workflow. Let me just automate it, apply AI and call it good. But I think that you really need to actually think about, in context of the capabilities of AI and machine learning, how to design your entire AI native company around that, right? And I think people who are super technical in that space get that, but I think sometimes, like, we like, I meet founders who are learning to leverage AI now into their company, and it's a little bit harder because you get an automation mindset. But I would say on the regulatory side, I tend to, when I think about the first years of my career, I was like, a lot less in tune with regulation. So I would think of like, oh, how do we solve this problem? Let's just design it, and if it's not causing too many problems, it should be okay. But when I started to actually work in more regulated environments, I realized, okay, so now there's a framework that we need to apply. And there's a lot of resources on that. And there's people who spend their lives thinking about these things. So I would highly recommend, collaborating with those people, but not losing sight of the fact that regulation can sometimes kill innovation. It could be very helpful to it, but it could also kill innovation. So a balanced touch, I would say, and that's hard to do in real life. But I think that now with different frameworks of human in the loop and things like that, we can at least kind of feel more confident that we can get things to the next stage in a responsible way, but also, staying very mindful of the fact that over regulating things is also going to kill innovation.
Well, and I love the way you started that answer, which is why start by throwing AI at a problem? Well, you need to define the problem better, right? And I'm reminded of something my co-founder and chief technology officer said years ago, which is, I can model anything, but you have to ask the question first.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And datafying things, right? The data, a lot of times, like if you have a habit of trying to datafy a question, the answers are easily understood. You know what I mean? Because then you take a more systematic approach to how you are designing everything. You're not just kind of willy-nilly going about it. Like there's an approach. So I think that having like when you were talking about the frameworks, I think you want to be open to different variations and changes that you need to make when you're designing any system. But I think having a very systematic, a style and how you approach things is a really good foundational habit to have.
Yeah, and that's a key point, how you think about the data collection, right? And I mean, there are companies for whom data is the product, right? They're essentially data aggregators, data resellers. But thinking about how are you going to measure what matters, collect the data you need, either to make your product better, to know how people are using it, or to turn that data into something of value itself. It's something that can't be done haphazardly for sure.
I think always going back to understanding how that system works. So, what problem are you trying to solve? Who's your customer? How do they behave? What's important to them? What's important to you and your organization for your internal operations to run? And then, what are some of the data sources that you could use to answer these questions? So, again, I think to the earlier point is you need to really understand the questions that you're asking and then finding relevant data sources as proxies that could answer those questions. Sometimes it's not even a direct data, but it's a good proxy that could help you understand it.
So you're helping our listeners think about some of these problems, but you also write a regular blog. The blog's called The Lab. Tell us a little bit about that project. How'd you start writing? What kinds of questions do you tackle there? Are there room for guest contributors?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I always had these kind of, conversations with people in my, friends network and colleagues, where you could get a little bit philosophical, right? And then you just kind of have like a topic and you just go back and forth and get to some conclusions or maybe to even more questions. At some point, one of my friends told me, "Well, why don't you write some of this stuff? I mean, it could be interesting maybe for other people." And I literally laughed because I thought, "Well, who would be interested in reading them?" And so because I've never done, I'm not a huge social media person. I mean, I probably should be, but maybe I'm just a little bit I'm the older millennial that didn't get on the TikTok bandwagon.
It's better for your mental health not to be. Yeah,
For
it's
sure, for sure. But yeah, so I thought to myself, you know what? It's not a bad idea. It's not like anyone has to read it. It's just so I started a Substack and then I started to write some things and mostly, focused on commercialization, strategy, kind of different frameworks. Sometimes publishing some data, like if I do an interesting analysis that I think might be useful to other people. So yeah, over time it just sort of, kind of grew and people shared it with other people and I shared it with people. Grew a little bit of confidence to be like, "Oh, would you like to read my Substack? I mean, don't have to, but if you want to check it out." And then they subscribed, which was nice. So yeah, it's just a little bit of a place to explore and write things. And the more I'm kind of developing it, I feel that it would be interesting to get some additional voices. So I'm very excited to have guest contributors because I think it shouldn't just be me talking.
sure, sure. So, for our listeners, then it's called The Lab. You can find a link to it in the show notes. And so if you want to hear or read, I should say, more of Mita's thoughts on these kinds of topics, you can find them there and probably, ask her questions. I hope there's a way to do that in Substack or add some comments and suggest some
It
topics.
is, yeah. Comment, yeah.
Um, you know, I'm interested both in terms of how you come up with ideas for that, but just in general, I'm exhausted trying to keep up with how fast innovation seems to be moving right now and in this moment, especially for those of us who do have our eyes focused and trained on uses of AI and data and sort of digital technologies. It's mind blowing how quickly things are moving. How do you keep pace? How do you stay current, given all the innovation that's out there?
Yeah, so continuing education is super important to me. I try to read things as they come out and kind of not lose my, former scientist mind, if you will. So as new things come out, I try to stay on track. But actually, I would say probably most of my learning happens in two ways. One is actually aligning myself with people who are super curious. Like I have a lot of friends and people who when they find something, when they identify a new AI company or whatever, a new tool, they send it to me because it's just they're learning about it, so they find like, oh, let me just send it to Mita. So honestly, I learn a lot from people that are very smart in my circle, so I feel very lucky about that. But then the other thing is just being curious, right? Now, when I shared earlier about Perplexity, I just ask a lot of questions from Perplexity and then it sends me down a rabbit hole. And so it could be like an hour later and I've like gone to like, 10 different sources learning about stuff. So it's just like, staying curious. But then, things that are super relevant to my day-to-day work, I make a point to continue learning and reading about it. But you can't learn everything, right? Like now that's the problem is that like if you love to learn and if you came up as like a scientist, like you feel like you should know stuff, but then you quickly realize that you don't know stuff and you don't so you have to get comfortable with that too.
Yeah. I had a mentor before grad school and in grad school who said, you're always going to not know 99% of what's out there. The interesting question is what you do about that.
For sure.
Right? So-
For sure. But you know what? Adapting, I think, is very important. Like as I'm seeing, the past like 20 years has been a really great opportunity with all the technological advancements. And for me to continue to push myself to learn new things, right? Like not just saying, oh, times are changing, I'm getting older, like forget about it, or I don't have to learn anymore. Like I've already learned the things that I needed to learn. So just staying hungry to learn and applying yourself, I think is very important to as we get older.
Yeah, no, the humility, especially maybe the most important thing I learned in grad school is just to be honest when you don't know the answer to something and say, I don't know. I don't know that. Explain it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to fake it when I first got there and it was very quickly realized that I didn't know the first thing about what I was talking about. So better to just admit ignorance and then learn from there.
It's so interesting you say that because my PhD advisor, Dr. Medlin Bayan, he told me like when I had to go in front of my first like orals and all of that, he was like, listen, let me just share something with you. If you don't know something, don't try to BS because you're sitting in front of these guys like, or, ladies that are like waiting to just bury you. So don't do it. Just say that you don't know and you're more than happy to go learn and come back with the right answer. And I honestly, that's like a learning for me that I applied everything in my life.
Absolutely. No, super powerful. I do that with my kids. Kids are constantly asking questions. And I think I joke that like in the how to be a dad handbook, you're given this like how to bullshit an answer to any question, right? Like, but I love just telling them that I don't know the answer and then asking them what they think, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's so much more satisfying than trying to invent a rationale or invent something just because they expect you to know everything.
Yeah, and you can get caught these days. When our parents in their generation, like sometimes they would just tell you whatever, and then
Just make it up.
20 years later you learn it wasn't even correct. But now they're gonna send you the summary from Perplexity or GPT.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I always like to wrap up these conversations asking you to gaze into a crystal ball, right? And to say, if we do our jobs right at STEMA, CG, and elsewhere, what is biotech, what is health tech, what does medtech look like in the next 10 years? What is the change we're trying to foment?
I think the change that those who I think do it right will see is a complete reimagination of how we used to design products. Right. So like instead of like we said earlier, it's like not just trying to automate things, but actually try to redesign it with the technology that's accessible to us through AI and machine learning now. And I think those who probably won't succeed as much are the folks that either don't adopt AI in their work or just apply it in like a limited automation focused way. So that's I think the gap. But I think just completely shifting our mindset of how we design products with the tools that are available to us now is going to be the winning recipe.
Wonderful. Great words to wrap up on. Mida Pezeshkian, thank you so much for joining me. This was fascinating. I love the opportunity to revisit my product manager days and think through the tools and the skills and the impact that role has in product launch.
Thank you so much for having me. Super fun.
This has been another episode of the Talking Precision Medicine podcast, brought to you by Genialis. Hopefully by now you've subscribed to the show, but if not, go ahead and click that subscribe button and leave us a review. And please do pay us a visit at www.genialis.com. That's www.genialis.com to learn more about how AI is transforming precision medicine. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.